Ethan Hayes had long ago grown accustomed to the solitude of his life as a technician on an isolated moon. The Zeta-9 research outpost was perched on the edge of an icy crater, its walls worn by years of relentless alien storms. He spent most of his nights staring at the massive anomalies swirling beyond the reinforced glass, a ribbon of colors and light, crackling like static, hovering over the landscape. The researchers called it the temporal rift, a mysterious vortex rumored to link distant realms and dimensions. Scientists had traveled from far corners of the galaxy to study it, though none had discovered much beyond its strange ability to manipulate energy fields. Night after night, Ethan had watched the rift from his workstation, an endless vigil in the hope of seeing something unusual. But after months of uneventful shifts, his initial awe had faded. Now, all he felt was an emptiness that echoed with each silent hour. Until tonight. The night began as any other, with Ethan settling into his post, a cup of synth-brewed coffee warming his hands as he scanned the feed of readings and sensors on his monitor. The console buzzed in monotonous rhythms, mapping energy flows and magnetic pulses from the rift. But then, just past midnight, the console emitted a shrill beep. Ethan glanced down, startled to see an energy spike rippling across the screen, a surge like nothing he'd ever witnessed. He bolted upright, eyes locked on the glass wall of the observation deck. The rift outside pulsed brighter, colors deepening from pale blue to a burning violet, swirling like a vortex. The air around him hummed, and for a moment, Ethan's heart pounded with fear, wondering if the rift might tear open and engulf the outpost itself. Then, from the center of the vortex, something began to emerge. At first, it was just a shimmer, a figure barely visible, silhouetted against the swirling light. But as the shape moved closer, stepping through the barrier of the rift like a shadow breaking free of its owner, he saw her. A woman, unlike any he'd ever seen, materialized in the center of the anomaly. She was ethereal, with skin that glowed faintly under the strange light, and her hair flowed in gentle waves, as if woven from threads of midnight itself. She wore a gown adorned with shifting stardust patterns that seemed alive, each thread catching the light in ways that defied logic. Her eyes sparkled, reflecting the rift's colors, a warm, radiant gaze locking onto him across the deck. Ethan's breath caught, his instincts warring between awe and disbelief. The woman's eyes met his, holding him there as though she could peer into his very soul. She tilted her head, a small smile forming on her lips as she approached, each step graceful and deliberate. Somehow, she bypassed the containment barrier, stepping lightly onto the metal deck as if she had every right to be there. "Hello, Ethan," she said, her voice smooth and melodic, filling the silence with a warmth that felt almost tangible. "I am Lyra, a succubus from a realm beyond yours." He blinked, his mind racing to process her words. "A succubus," he managed, the word catching on his tongue as he searched her face for any hint of deception. "Yes," she replied with a gentle smile, as if amused by his astonishment. "Though not in the sense your myths might describe. In my realm, we exist as guardians and travelers, exploring distant places and bridging connections." She looked around, taking in the sterile walls and blinking lights of the outpost with faint curiosity. "And I have come to grant you 3 gifts." Ethan's eyes widened. 3 gifts? He barely knew what to say, struggling to reconcile the ordinary world he knew with the surreal encounter unfolding before him. Lyra nodded, her eyes softening. "Yes. But there is a condition. These gifts must come from your truest desires. They will manifest not from impulse or passing want, but from what lies deep within your heart." His mind spun. What could he possibly ask of a being like her? Fame? Wealth? Knowledge of the universe? Yet, in the moment, none of those desires surfaced. All he could see was the kindness in her eyes, a calm and warmth that stirred something forgotten within him. Finally, after a moment's silence, he found his voice. If you don't mind," he began, his voice faltering, "I'd like to know you better, Lyra. Not just as a celestial being, but as someone I could maybe call a friend." He paused, feeling the heat rise in his cheeks. Could we spend a day together? A faint blush spread across her cheeks, and her calm, otherworldly grace faltered, just for an instant. Her composure melted into something almost human, and she gave a soft, surprised laugh. A day. Together? Her voice was tinged with disbelief and something else, a touch of vulnerability. You would use your first wish to ask for my company? He nodded, his nerves settling as he saw her reaction. Yes. If that's possible, that is. For a moment, Lyra gazed at him, her eyes searching, as if she were glimpsing into some hidden part of him, then she offered a gentle nod. Very well, Ethan. I grant this wish. Tomorrow, we will share a day together as you desire. With a wave of her hand, she disappeared as quietly as she had come, leaving behind a faint shimmer in the air. Ethan remained rooted to the spot, his mind buzzing with wonder. Could he really have just met an interdimensional being, one who seemed almost as human as he was? As he returned to his quarters, anticipation and curiosity tangled in his mind, carrying him into an uneasy sleep, filled with dreams of stardust and celestial eyes. When morning arrived, he would step into a day unlike any he had ever known, and with each passing moment, his understanding of the universe and his own heart would forever change. The dawn of the barren moon brought a muted, pale light through the transparent dome of the outpost, casting long shadows across the metallic floors and cold walls. Ethan woke from a fitful sleep, his mind buzzing with the memory of Lyra's visit. Had it really happened? He tried to brush off his anticipation, telling himself it was likely just a hallucination brought on by the endless hours of solitude and the proximity to the energy field. But as he stepped into the observation deck, his doubts faded. There, waiting by the reinforced glass wall that separated the cold void from the outpost interior, was Lyra. Today, she looked different, her radiant attire swapped for something simpler and more familiar. She wore a fitted coat, dark and elegant, with accents that hinted at her celestial origins, thread-like patterns of iridescent stardust traced along the collar and cuffs. Her hair, normally flowing like liquid shadows, was braided, falling over one shoulder. She smiled as she saw him, and her eyes shone with a warmth he hadn't noticed the night before. Good morning, Ethan, she greeted him, her voice as smooth and inviting as ever. Are you ready to spend the day together? His heart raced. Good morning, Lyra. Yes, I suppose I am, he replied, trying to shake off his nerves. He still couldn't believe she had granted his request, such a simple yet profound desire. You look more human, he added awkwardly, noting the subtle change in her appearance. A faint blush colored her cheeks, and she lowered her gaze with a gentle smile. I thought it would make you more comfortable, she said. My usual form can be a little overwhelming. She paused, her eyes sparkling with humor. Besides, today isn't about my realm. It's about understanding yours. They walked out of the observation deck, and Ethan took her on a tour of the outpost. It was a utilitarian structure, all cold metal and glaring lights, a place designed purely for scientific work with little thought for comfort. But Lyra seemed fascinated by it, asking him about the technology, the purpose of the various machines, and the science behind the research. She listened intently, her eyes alight with genuine curiosity. You're studying the energy field outside, yes? She asked, gesturing toward the rift beyond the glass walls as they passed another window. Yes, Ethan replied, feeling a strange pride in his work as he explained it to her. We call it the temporal rift. It's unlike anything we've seen, an anomaly that shifts between dimensions, we think. The theory is that it might offer some kind of gateway, though we're still not sure where it leads, or if it's even safe. Lyra nodded, glancing at the swirling light outside. In my world, such anomalies are considered sacred spaces. They connect not just places, but ideas and energies. There are beings who dedicate their lives to protecting and studying them. She looked at him thoughtfully. Perhaps that's why you were stationed here. The idea hadn't occurred to him. He had always thought of his assignment as a form of exile, punishment for being too unambitious in his career. But the way Lyra spoke about it made him feel like his role held a greater purpose. For the first time, he saw his position here as more than just a job. It was part of a much larger, more mysterious web of connections and meaning. As the hours passed, they talked about everything: his life on Earth, the family he rarely saw, the friends he'd lost touch with since taking the outpost job. Lyra listened with a quiet attentiveness that put him at ease. He found himself sharing memories he hadn't revisited in years, stories of his childhood, his dreams before he became caught in the monotony of his life. They took a break in the common area, where Ethan brewed 2 cups of the station's bitter synth coffee. Lyra took a tentative sip, wrinkling her nose at the taste, then laughed, a sound that echoed through the sterile metal halls like music. She held the cup with both hands, a puzzled look on her face as she tasted it again. "It's terrible," she declared with a smile, and Ethan couldn't help but laugh, too. "Believe me, it's the only thing that keeps us awake," he replied, watching her expression with amusement. For a moment, they sat together in a comfortable silence, and he felt a strange sense of peace, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. After their coffee, he took her outside. The outpost had a small landing area sheltered by the outcrop of rock, a space where crew members could stretch their legs in full gear under the distant light of alien stars. Today, Ethan and Lyra stood under the faint blue glow of the nearby star, casting pale light over the jagged landscape. Though they needed no gear to stand in the oxygen bubble, Lyra's presence added an element of wonder to the harsh, rocky terrain. Lyra knelt down, touching a small, rugged crystal on the ground, her expression thoughtful. "In my realm, every piece of land has a song," she murmured, her voice soft. "The ground beneath us has witnessed countless stories, each step leaving a memory in the dust. Even here, where life is rare, the land has its own quiet existence." Ethan felt a pang of wonder, imagining the world through her eyes. To him, the moon had always seemed cold, lifeless, a barren stretch of rock where he went through the motions of his work. But standing beside Lyra, he felt an unfamiliar appreciation for the rough landscape and distant stars. It felt alive in a way he hadn't seen before. They spent the rest of the day walking in silence, exploring the rocky outcrops and narrow caverns near the outpost. Lyra's presence seemed to transform everything around them, infusing even the cold stone with a sense of life and connection. And as they wandered, Ethan felt the weight of his isolation begin to lift, replaced by a deep sense of companionship. As the artificial lights from the outpost flickered onto signal evening, they returned inside. Their day together was coming to an end, and a bittersweet ache filled Ethan's chest as they stepped back into the observation deck. The rift outside glowed softly, as if in acknowledgement of their shared day. "Thank you, Ethan," Lyra said, her voice soft as she turned to him. "For today. It's been a long time since I felt like this." "Like what?" he asked, his heart pounding. "Like I wasn't just an interdimensional traveler," she replied, a soft smile on her lips. "Today, I felt a little less alone." The word struck him deeply, and he reached for her hand on instinct, grasping it gently. Her hand was warm, grounding him, yet ethereal, as if she could slip away at any moment. "Does that mean you're going to leave now?" he asked, though he feared the answer. She nodded, her eyes brimming with a sadness he hadn't expected. "Yes, but not forever. I have my duties, just as you have yours. But you still have 2 wishes, Ethan. When you call on me, I'll return." Ethan tightened his grip on her hand, swallowing back the ache of goodbye. "Thank you, Lyra. For being here. For letting me know you." They stood together in silence, the light of the rift bathing them both in a soft glow. Then, with a final, lingering look, she withdrew her hand from his and took a step back, her form dissolving into a shimmering light that was drawn back into the rift like stardust caught in a cosmic current. As she disappeared, Ethan felt the familiar emptiness return, but it was different now. It was filled with the warmth of a day spent with someone who had shared not only his world but a glimpse of hers. And he knew that he would see her again. When she did, he would be ready with his second wish, though he already knew it would be one born not just of curiosity, but of connection. The days following Lyra's departure drifted by with a slow, dreamlike quality. The once empty halls of the Zeta-9 outpost now felt haunted by her presence, her laughter, her curious questions. Ethan found himself glancing over his shoulder, half expecting her to be there, smiling that gentle, knowing smile. Even the sterile glow of his console had taken on new meaning, reminding him of the way she had listened intently to his descriptions of the rift and its mysteries. But each shift ended in silence, with only the hum of machines and the vast emptiness of the rift beyond the glass. One quiet evening, as he reviewed the usual readings and analyzed the day's data, he felt a familiar warmth pulse through the room. The air around him seemed to shimmer, as if charged with stardust. He turned, his heart racing with anticipation. And there she was, Lyra, standing in the observation deck, her radiant presence filling the sterile room with light and warmth. Her attire had returned to its celestial form, a gown that shimmered with threads of cosmic silver and flowing midnight blue, her eyes reflecting the swirling lights of the rift outside. "Hello, Ethan," she said softly, her voice filled with both warmth and a hint of melancholy. "You called me back, though I suspect you knew I would return even without it." Ethan smiled, relief and joy flooding him at the sight of her. "It's good to see you, Lyra." He paused, gathering his thoughts. He had spent many sleepless nights trying to decide what to ask for his second wish, and he knew, deep down, that there was only one thing that would satisfy his curiosity. "I want to understand your realm," he finally said, his voice steady but tinged with awe. "Not just through stories, but truly understand it. The knowledge of your world, your people, your way of seeing things." Lyra's expression softened, her eyes bright with surprise and approval. "A noble request," she murmured, a touch of pride in her voice. "Few beings ask for such a gift, Ethan. Many desire power, wealth, or secrets to manipulate others. But you seek to understand. I will grant this gift, but there is a weight to this knowledge. Some truths are burdensome, some may even challenge what you hold dear." He nodded, ready. "I want to know, Lyra. Whatever it takes." Lyra stepped closer, raising her hands, her slender fingers shimmering with a faint, otherworldly light. "Then hold still," she whispered. "This will be unlike anything you've ever felt." With her hands gently placed on either side of his head, she closed her eyes, and a rush of warmth flooded Ethan's mind. It was as though a door had opened, unleashing a torrent of images, sounds, and emotions that crashed over him like a wave. His vision blurred, and suddenly he was no longer in the outpost. He found himself in a world that defied all logic, a vast landscape of floating islands woven together by silver threads of energy, each one adorned with gardens of glowing crystals, rivers of stardust, and ethereal beings that moved with grace and purpose. They wore garments that seemed to merge with their very essence, woven from threads of light and shadow, and they spoke in a language that resonated deep within his bones, even if he couldn't understand the words. Ethan could feel Lyra's presence guiding him, a steady warmth anchoring him in the overwhelming beauty and strangeness of her world. "This is my realm, Ethan," her voice echoed in his mind. "A place of interwoven energy, where matter and spirit coexist as one. We are not bound by time or space as you understand it. Here, thought shapes reality, and intention carves the world." He saw beings like Lyra, figures radiating calm wisdom, moving with purpose and a quiet dignity. They weren't just beings of beauty, they were guardians, each one carrying an unspoken duty to maintain harmony across realms, to safeguard the delicate balance between their world and others. And then, in a rush of images, he glimpsed Lyra's life. He saw fragments of her memories, her training as a young succubus, her first crossing between dimensions, her encounters with beings from other realms. He felt her joys, her triumphs, but also her deep loneliness, the sense of isolation she carried as one who could traverse dimensions yet rarely linger in any. Ethan's heart ached as he saw flashes of her wandering alone in the vast reaches of the cosmos, visiting realms beyond his comprehension, witnessing civilizations rise and fall. Her gaze was often distant, lost in the enormity of her duties, yet it was tinged with a yearning for connection, a longing he understood all too well. Finally, he saw the moment she had first glimpsed him, standing alone in the observation deck, gazing at the rift with a quiet intensity. He felt her curiosity, her decision to reach out, and her surprise at the warmth she felt in his presence. The memory lingered, an echo of her vulnerability, and he realized how rare it was for her to connect with someone like this. As the vision faded, he found himself back in the observation deck, Lyra's hands still resting on his temples. She withdrew them gently, her eyes searching his face as if to gauge his reaction. Ethan's heart pounded, the depth of her world and her life leaving him breathless. I never imagined," he whispered, feeling both exhilarated and humbled. "Your world, Lyra, it's beautiful, and yet, there's so much weight on your shoulders." Lyra nodded, her gaze soft and steady. "That weight is my duty. I am bound to my realm, but I chose to visit yours, to cross dimensions and bridge the spaces between. It is rare that we linger in other realms, rarer still that we find those who understand our purpose." He reached out, his hand resting on hers, his expression solemn. "You don't have to be alone, Lyra. Not here, not with me." A hint of sadness touched her eyes, and she gave him a gentle, bittersweet smile. "Ethan, my life is woven into the fabric of my world. We Succubi exist as bridges, guardians of the rifts. Our lives are not meant for permanence, not even with those who understand us." He felt the weight of her words, the finality they carried, and a hollow ache formed in his chest. Yet he also felt a resolve building within him, a desire to share something real with her, even if it couldn't last forever. "Even so," he said, his voice low but filled with conviction, "I'm grateful to know you, Lyra. I'm grateful for this knowledge, for this connection." A flicker of warmth lit her gaze, a hint of something beyond her stoic grace. "And I am grateful for you, Ethan. Rarely do we find souls willing to see us beyond our duties." They stood in silence for a moment, the connection between them more profound than words could express. The distant rift outside pulsed softly, as if acknowledging their bond, a beacon linking two worlds that rarely touched. After a moment, Lyra drew a small, shimmering vial from the folds of her gown. Inside, a faint light pulsed, illuminating the tiny container like a miniature star. "Take this," she said, placing it in his hand. "It's a shard of my realm's energy, a gift to anchor our bond. If ever you need me, or if your heart calls to know more, open it, and I will return. This is my promise to you, Ethan, as a friend." He looked down at the vial, its warmth radiating through his hand, and a quiet sense of peace settled over him. "Thank you, Lyra," he whispered, holding it close. "I'll keep it safe." With a final, lingering look, she took a step back, her figure blurring at the edges, the light around her brightening. Her gaze held his as she began to fade, a silent promise in her eyes, a vow that transcended the rift between their worlds. As she dissolved into shimmering particles, drawn back through the rift, Ethan felt both sadness and a newfound strength. He stood alone in the observation deck, holding the vial close, his mind brimming with the knowledge of her world, his heart warmed by the memory of her touch. And for the first time in his life, Ethan felt the vastness of the universe not as a void, but as a bridge he had crossed, bound by a thread of stardust that would forever connect his world to hers. In the days following his second encounter with Lyra, Ethan carried the vial of energy with him everywhere, feeling its faint warmth like a heartbeat against his chest. It was as if a piece of her realm had settled into his soul, linking him to something beyond his isolated post, beyond the cold, barren surface of the moon. His nights were no longer filled with the monotonous hum of machinery and endless data scrolling across screens. They were spent dreaming of her, of the places she had shown him, and of the feeling she had stirred within him, a feeling he thought was beyond his reach. Finally, on a quiet night under the distant light of alien stars, Ethan felt a longing too deep to ignore. He knew he had only one wish left, one final request he could ask of her. His heart pounded as he unfastened the vial from his neck and held it tightly, its warmth growing in his hand as though sensing his resolve. He opened it, releasing a shimmer of light that filled the room. A pulse of energy swept through the observation deck, and the familiar warmth enveloped him. Lyra appeared before him, more radiant and beautiful than ever, her cosmic gown shimmering with threads of stardust, her eyes filled with a quiet knowing. "Ethan," she said softly, her gaze meeting his with a mixture of warmth and apprehension. "You've called me for your final gift." He nodded, his throat tightening. "Yes, I have," he whispered, feeling the weight of this last wish settle on his heart. "But it's not something I ask lightly." Her expression softened, a hint of sadness crossing her face. "I knew this moment would come," she said. "Tell me, Ethan, what is it that you desire?" He took a deep breath, summoning the courage to ask for what his heart truly longed for. "Lyra, I want a chance to love you," he said, his voice steady but his eyes searching hers. "Not just as someone distant, or as a cosmic being, but as someone real, someone I can hold and share my life with, even if it's only for a short time." Her eyes widened, a faint blush spreading across her cheeks as she looked away. "Ethan, love is not something I've ever been asked for. In my world, love isn't something we understand in the way mortals do. We exist as guardians, bound to the flow of dimensions. We aren't made for permanence, or for companionship like yours." He felt his heart ache, but he didn't look away. "I understand that, Lyra. I know our time would be brief, and that you have your duties. But even if we can only have moments together, I want to share them with you. I want to give you a place to belong, if only for a little while." Lyra looked at him, her eyes shining with an emotion he hadn't seen before, a mix of vulnerability, longing, and uncertainty. "Ethan," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper, "do you realize what you're asking?" He nodded, stepping closer, his hand reaching out to hers. "I do, Lyra. I don't expect you to change, or to give up your world. I only ask that, for as long as we're together, you let yourself feel what it's like to be loved. To be cherished." Her hand trembled as she placed it in his, and a single tear, a glimmering droplet that sparkled like a fragment of the cosmos, rolled down her cheek. "In all my journeys, I've never felt this way. I didn't know it was possible to feel connected, to desire something more than just fulfilling my duties." Ethan gently brushed the tear from her cheek, his fingers lingering on her soft, radiant skin. "Then stay with me, Lyra," he whispered. "Let's create something beautiful, even if it's fleeting." She closed her eyes, a soft sigh escaping her as she leaned into him, her form solidifying, becoming more tangible, more human. For the first time, he felt the warmth of her body, the delicate weight of her leaning into him. And in that moment, they were no longer guardian and mortal, but simply two beings, drawn together across the vastness of space and time. They spent the night in each other's arms, sharing quiet whispers and soft laughter, recounting memories and dreams. He told her of Earth, of the places he'd loved and the people he'd cared for. She shared stories of her travels, tales of distant realms, of friends she'd left behind, and of the stars that had once been her only companions. Together, they watched the rift from the observation deck, its gentle pulsing light casting a glow over them. Lyra's hand intertwined with his, her head resting on his shoulder as they gazed into the swirling colors. For once, the rift felt like a quiet guardian, a silent witness to their connection, binding them together in its cosmic embrace. But as the night deepened, a quiet sadness settled between them, an unspoken understanding that their time was drawing to a close. They both knew that her realm would call her back, that her duties were inseparable from her existence. As dawn approached, Lyra turned to him, her gaze filled with a mixture of love and sorrow. "Ethan, I have to go soon." He nodded, his heart heavy, though he had known this moment would come. "I know. But I'll never forget this, Lyra. I'll carry it with me always. She cupped his face, her touch warm and tender. Neither will I, she whispered. In my world, love is rare, fleeting, but you have given me a gift I will cherish forever. No matter where I go, a part of me will always belong to you. With a final kiss, she pulled back, her form beginning to shimmer, her edges softening as she prepared to return to her realm. Her gaze lingered on him, a promise shining in her eyes. Ethan, she said, her voice a fading echo. You have shown me something I never thought possible. Though I must leave, remember that our worlds are connected now, forever entwined by this bond. I will return when the rift allows, whenever you need me most. He swallowed back the ache, watching as she began to dissolve into stardust, her figure merging with the swirling lights of the rift. I'll wait for you, Lyra, he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. No matter how long it takes. And with a final, radiant smile, she faded into the rift, her presence lingering like a gentle warmth, a faint shimmer in the air. Ethan remained there, gazing at the spot where she had vanished, his heart full of both love and loss. The rift outside pulsed softly, its colors shifting in a way that almost felt like a heartbeat, a quiet reminder of her promise. He knew his life would return to the familiar rhythm of solitude and silence, that the nights would once again be long and empty. But now, he carried a piece of her with him, a warmth that defied the void, a love that transcended dimensions. And so, he waited, holding onto the memory of her touch, the light in her eyes, and the promise that somewhere, across the vastness of space and time, she was thinking of him too.